Welcome to the Impact Investor Podcast. Today we're joined by the incredible Gregory Shepard, a serial entrepreneur with 12 successful exits under his belt. You don't want to miss this episode. Gregory shares insights from his groundbreaking book, The Startup Lifecycle, which is informed by over 1,200 interviews with founders. We dive into topics like building process early, staying agile, leveraging leading indicators to drive success. Gregory's journey is not just about business, it's about pushing the limits. He's climbed El Capitan, driven the Pan American Highway, even swum with the sharks. These adventures reflect his fearless approach to entrepreneurship, where failures are seen as progress and passion is key. We explore how his experiences related to driving a business, from maintaining focus and to drive understanding, from intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. Tune in to discover how Gregory's blueprint for success can help you navigate the startup world with the precision of a Navy SEAL mission. Get ready for actionable advice and inspiring stories that will transform your approach to entrepreneurship and investing. Welcome to today's show. I'm super excited to be able to chat with Gregory Shepard, serial entrepreneur with a legacy of building and selling 12 businesses across, I'm going to say globally, because that's really the touch points he's made. As the founder of Boss Capital Partners, Greg has spearheaded multiple company exits, including close to $1 billion transaction. So without any further ado, I'm excited to have you again today. And you were podcast, I'm going to say top of my head, what was the number? Oh my God, 149, I think it was, that we were able to interview with you in the past. And I'm super excited to have you here today, Greg. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and I really appreciate it.
Well, Greg, we know as we like to start our shows, we like to get a little bit more background on yourself. And because we have already done that in the past, maybe you can share a little bit more. And of course, touch base on this exciting book that you've released, because we got lots of questions on that. And then once you're doing that, one thing about you that nobody would know.
Okay, so let me think here. So basically my background is 4 private equity awards for transactions between 250 million and $1 billion. 12 startups, 12 exits. I'm on my 13th startup right now. There's a lot of other accolades, but you had them all on the previous podcast. Something that people don't know about me, like a lot of people don't know about me, is that I have autism, which is a blessing and a curse a lot of times.
No, that's awesome. Brilliant. And I think that there's, before we dive into that part and about the things we've already learned from the past, what you talk about on the autism side, I do have a kind of a follow-up question to that is, where did you learn about this, and how did you embrace it, and how did you decide to go forward and talk freely that you have this neurodivergent learning ability, and how does it benefit your day each day?
Yeah, I mean, I was diagnosed when I was real young, and then my mom didn't want me to be categorized that way, or what she called labeled. So she hid it, and then I found out when I was 35, and then I went and got 4 diagnosis because I didn't believe it was true. Um, and then what I did, I hid it for a long, long time, and then I decided that I would come out and tell everybody. So I did a TED Talk on it. And then I have to admit, I expected everybody to not want to work with me anymore and be like, this guy, with, disabilities, they call it, and all this. And it went the other direction. Everybody was like, oh, some people were like, yeah, we knew. And other people were like, oh, that's amazing. This is incredible. What's your superpower? Everybody wants to know, Um, and on one side, it makes, things difficult to keep things together. But on the other side, because we're not, like, people think we're smarter or we're dumber or whatever. We are just a different operating system, so we just think differently, and that difference gives us an advantage, I think. So it's just an advantage that you get by thinking differently than everybody else. You see things differently, so you see things they don't see.
Agreed. I love that. And I guess as you start to unfold this and you look back at all of the businesses that you've created, it doesn't seem like at all it was anything close to being a crutch or affect you in any way. And one of the questions I have, and we're going to dive right into this because to me this is where the real, I think, gold of the book is. And actually, before I ask that question, can you give us a quick snapshot of the book? Um, it was created on September 24th, 2024. It launched. What was the background? When did you start it, and where did the whole side and structure come to? Why you decided to launch this book?
Well, I finished after I retired from the whole eBay enterprise marketing solutions situation. I went into politics trying to move money down to startups, and I couldn't do it because there was a high failure rate. So they said, we're budgeting as much as we can, considering how much of the money is not used or not turned around in terms of some sort of impact because it's failed startups. So what I did is I launched a research project that took 5 years to find out founder success and failure. Um, After that, I went and back to politics. They turned me down again. So then I decided I have all this data. I need to write a book and give everybody what I learned. And that was the sort of the whole catalyst of the book is like, here's what I learned, everybody. Just trying to help people out with what I learned because it would be a shame to keep it all, in my head.
I will agree with that. And being able to go through a lot of your content, of course, you do a lot of podcasting, you've done a lot of talks, and then going through and now being able to take all of that information and get into this book. There was some, I think, the really deep information, but the way you shared it was so easy to understand. So it wasn't like you were sitting there going, "Oh, another complex way of how to run a company." It was, here are the steps of how to build and be successful. And I'm going to share stories that help you better understand how these things unfold. And I was so enthralled with the stories that I started to like, wow, I love how he did that. And then when I was listening to your podcast, I started to connect these stories because you say, every year I do one thing to challenge myself. And this was obviously where this all came from, which got me even more excited because as I hear and listen to more of your content, you share this one thing that you did. And then when you go into the book, you start to share that as kind of your intro to, I'm going to talk about this section of my book, but I'm going to start off with this story. And this story relates so much to the content you're going to learn. And I just loved how you put that all together. It really made hopefully the audience be able to really relate better. And as a storyteller myself, I think everything's a story. I want to tell a story about everything. I don't even want to tell you facts because I don't think anybody will remember them. Even though my brain cares about data, all it wants is data. The story is what ties all this together. So we're going to kind of dive into some of those learnings, but maybe, in the 7-part series that you talk about all the different stages of the life cycle, are there any things that post book, post talks, that you would go back and say, you know what, I add this into the book. I should have added this and put more emphasis on this because I'm getting so many founders asking me these questions. And next book's going to have chapter 7 of X. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a big distance from phase to phase, like from vision to product and from product to go to market, etc. Those are big spaces. There's a lot of things that happen in there. And after I wrote the book and after, it went to the publisher and then I couldn't work on it anymore. They actually cut me off because I kept making changes. Um, I thought I should have put what I call gates in between. So basically, validation gates, right? So instead of saying you go from vision to product, you go from vision to, prototype, and from prototype to pilot, and from pilot to beta, and then from beta into your minimal viable product, which would be like gates in between the process to break it down even more for them. Because I realized afterwards, after, talking to founders and, people that have read the book, they're like, there's a lot that happens between that and we still get lost. So I was like, oh man, I missed that. So I would have done that. I would have put validation gates in between.
I love that. Well, you do put checkpoints, like things that, hey, reference points. You should think about these things. So I think that's very valuable as well. And it's almost becoming a playbook instead of a book. Like you're almost saying, here's the best way to build a company. Just read this book and keep reading it during the process of building your company, because each one of these stages you're going to go through in each chapter. Now, to your point, there's going to be a lot deeper sections that you need. Well, come back and we'll talk about it, and we can set up a call, and you can have the team take care of this, because I think there is a lot more value there for sure. But it's kind of the coaching guide that works you through that. And there's like a few pieces that kind of really stood out to me, is that in the process of your book, you analyze each stage, which is great, but everything is processed. And
Yeah,
I the question, and this is what I love, because my brain
that's the
is
autism right
identical.
there.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
That's everything to me is meticulously done. And what I the question I had though is that, you know, and call this, it's not contradictory, because I think this is where your creativity comes in, is that everything is processed, and then there's a point where you say, on the product and engineering side, you get into it and you say, stay agile. And the reason I wanted to ask this question is because for me, everything is very linear. And then all of a sudden you're saying, but wait a second, at this stage, you need to be agile. Can you dive into why that is important to a founder if they're going to be very linear and processed if they want to be successful? Why does agile help in this case?
I mean, so when you first start building a company and you get past your ideation, you're basically building your vision. Once that vision starts to get in the hands of your users or customers, then now it's their vision. So it changes from being your vision to their vision. Now, in order to make that pivot, in order to make those iterations quickly, you have to you have to be super stretch, super agile. And another example of that would be, let's say you're building this business, you're coming along, your one customer tells you this, another customer tells you that, another customer tells you that. And what you hear is what Steve Jobs said, which is they don't know what they want until they see it. And so when you show them something, usually it builds from that, right? So you're educating your customer on your product, and then they're giving you another idea. And then based on that next idea, another idea. So during the process, after you do your minimal viable product, your customers are driving the bus and you're building what your customers want. And because your customers are changing their mind based on what you give them to look at, you have to be super agile to keep up with them, right? To keep up with what they want. Otherwise, you are slowing down behind your customers. You need to be ahead of your customers. So I even experience that now with the Startup Science platform, where we build a feature, and then the programs will sit there and say, well, we really want this, this, and this. We'll build those features, and they'll say, okay, we really want this, this, and this, and it just never ends. So if you're not super, super agile, and it's okay that it never ends, that's evolution, right? But if it's fine that it never ends, and frustrations and little failures and little iterations, that's just another word for progress. So it's fine that this happens, but you have to be really, really agile in order to keep up with these changes, because doing a startup is constant change, and it should be. If you don't, you will absolutely fail, and the data supports that.
I love that. And the way you break it out, it really makes the founder think, if I'm going to be very processed, which means if I build a plan, I build a strategy, I'm working for towards this, it's very structured. It's very in my control. And now what you're saying is that as soon as you get this product out to market, it's not about you. It's not about your control. It's not about you managing all your resources and your team to deliver X. It's about learning what your customer really wants out of this product, because they're buying it. And you need to be able to adapt, listen, and understand what they have to say, and keep iterating in that process and managing it too while you're doing it, because you don't want feature creep. You don't want to go all bonkers on all of this
Off the
output.
rails, yeah.
Yeah, off the rails, and spend days doing nothing that doesn't bring any value. So it really is allowing yourself to let that control at that point go, and then being able to set up funnels on how you get that information back. Is there ways that you've learned to get that really valuable information from the customer back to you so that you can action it in a better, more refined way versus fire hose, buckshot spray, and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, and then you fail because you just couldn't handle the income of the input of all of these users?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that one of the things I think it's important is that you have your North Star, right? This is your overarching vision. It's basically directionally correct, right? Where you're headed. But all of the iterations, all of the details, the product features and all that sort of stuff under that North Star are the customers. So you have to separate your vision from the details, right? That's the first sort of part about it, because you don't want to say as a founder, I'm going to not go after the North Star that I had visioned. Otherwise that's a pivot, right? But little iterations aren't pivots. Those are just evolutionary changes along the path. And what I do is I tell founders, I'm like, listen, you need to put together what I call advisory boards. And these are the people that should advise you both on your vision and on the small iterations you do to help you prioritize what you actually do and what you don't do. So those advisory boards are a acquisition advisor. So somebody that's your ideal acquirer. You have somebody on there. You have a customer. You have a user. If your customer and your user are not the same person, then you have a user. And then you have an industry advisor. So somebody that knows the industry that you're in. And then you need at least those three, but you could have five of each, right? And then you talk to them about the feedback you're getting. You talk to them about how this feedback would change the way your platform operates or whatever your product is works, and so on and so forth. And then this will sort of help guide you, right? Keep you inside of those bumper rails so you're not going off, because what you don't want to do is build into, what you said, the feature creep, and end up building the Winchester mystery house, because you keep adding things on. And what you also don't want to do is put yourself in a situation where you are building for one customer or one customer segment, right? And then alienating everybody else. So you have to consider all the data. So what I do is I have a big backlog. It's just all the ideas that I need. Then I go in, and these are ideas that come from the customers, they come from the advisory boards, etc. I go in and I run surveys with the customers. So I ask them, would this feature be useful to you? Would you pay for this feature? Would this feature save you time? Or I ask them, is this thing a frustration? Is this thing a pain point? I'm trying to isolate, is it a is it a pain point, or is it a frustration, right? Like, what am I building for them, and how is it going to help them? Then finally what I do is I do a SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses being internal, opportunities and threats being external to your business. And then I break it down by impact and effort. So what has the highest impact with the lowest effort? You do a quad chart on that, right? And just put dots on there and say, this thing has, it's going to take me a month to build this product, and, I'm going to make $50 more a month off of it, right? Or this thing is going to take me 3 days. I'm going to make $50 a month. And so then you can start prioritizing those things that have the highest impact with the lowest effort ahead of those things. Because what you don't want to do when you're building a product is have something that takes 6 months, and that is holding up a whole bunch of things that takes 3 days, right? You you got to get the things done that you can get done to have the highest impact with the lowest effort first.
If I'm going to go back to the red button, if I had the red button, I would be hitting it right now. The screen would be lighting up, and you got a bingo. You got a bingo. Like, this is gold. So if you take this impact and effort, which I 1000% agree, um, I will tell founders from a high level perspective, if you're building a business, are you building a vitamin or a painkiller? Because if you're
Oh,
building a vitamin,
100%. I love
people
that.
won't give a shit about your business. But when you're building a painkiller, people need you. They want you there. So taking exactly what you just shared on how you look at that end result, all of this again, what you've described is the process of going through how you get to what is crucial for your business. And the underlying part of it is this going to generate you more revenue? If you take a driveway that you just put in and you do it in concrete or you do it in asphalt and you put some designs on it, you spend $1 million, does it increase the value of your home or does it leave it at the same value? People don't look at it. They're just like, oh, I'm just going to spend the money. But if that value is going to increase the value of a home by 20, 30%, it's worth putting that feature in. If it's not, then why are you putting it in? And it goes right to your point, is that if I'm building this business and I've got to break down what the customer wants, and if 40% of customers want this feature, and this feature is going to take 6 months, but this other feature, 35% people want, and it's going to take me a week to build, why am I not putting that into the cycle and getting that built right away?
Yeah, and I do it with budgeting too. So so if you're looking at whatever currency, dollar for dollar, right? What has the highest impact with the lowest cost? Right. So if you're even looking at the money side, you're also, when it comes to marketing and sales and stuff, you're sitting there. Like, I'll give you an example. So what we've been working on is using agentic AI and generative AI to automate a marketing process, right? Where the agentic AI is logging into things and doing what it does, which is like workflow process. And then the generative AI, which does the content. And so you're sitting there going, okay, dollar for dollar, if this costs me 20 grand to put together, but it means I don't have to hire 5 people, then dollar for dollar, it has the best. It's a good deal, right? It's got the highest impact with the lowest cost. Even though it's got an upfront cost, it's going to save me. So I look at those as leading and lagging indicators, right? So when I think about like KPIs, because this is kind of dives into KPIs a little bit. When I think about KPIs, a KPI has things that are associated with that KPI that helps you define that KPI. So first of all, any KPI should always call to growth, margin, and retention, which are the valuation drivers, the things that make your company valuable. So if you have a KPI that doesn't directly tie to either growth, margin, or retention, you shouldn't have that KPI. The second, because those are that's your financials, right? So you're tying your KPIs to your financials. The second thing is it should be tied to a functional area. So like growth is tied to sales and marketing, and retention is tied to service delivery, and margin is tied to your shared services, right? Operations, finance, accounting, IT, etc. Any shared services. So if you say this KPI is tied to sales and marketing, and it's a growth KPI tied to either the balance sheet or the P&L, that in this case it's the P&L, then now you have a metrics of making decisions based on impact and effort and tracking that over time. So instead of just sitting there going, I've got some KPIs that are random, you're sitting there going, I need to qualify this KPI. Does it tie to the financials? Does it tie to somebody at your company? Is there a number on somebody's head? Right. So you'll find that once you put a number on somebody's head and they know what success looks like, you're going to get better performance. So does it tie to a function area? Does it tie? And then the last part is it either a leading indicator, meaning it creates the future, or a lagging indicator, which means it is the present. So lagging indicators most of the time are financial numbers. So a lot of founders and investors are notorious for this. They look at the business by looking at the financials. And when you think about looking at the business by looking at the financials, that's like driving, looking behind you, because those financials were created by the leading indicators months before the financials hit the financial documents. So KPIs should be categorized as a leading or a lagging KPI tied to a functional area and tied to one of the valuation drivers. So that's sort of how I qualify that whole process, if that makes any sense. So it gives you like this perspective of your business. Now the last piece, I'm going to give you one more piece. I'm sorry, I know I'm going a little long, but one more piece. I always have actual, planned, and difference. So each KPI for each month, so you have a month on the top, and then you have actual, planned, different. So what is that? That is the KPI, but over time, right? So actual is what actually happened. So you have let's explain what a KPI is. So a K is the label, what it is, right? So sales is the K part. P is performance expectation. So that's planned in your tracking. And then after that, you have your indicator, which is what actually happened, right? And then you have to have a difference. Am I 20% off? Am I 30% off? How off am I? So that you can start to get your probability and predictability better over time. Because that's the magic formula, right? You get probability and predictability, and you're going to be successful.
I love this. So to kind of reiterate, there in the process of diving into how these KPIs will benefit your business, it's taking all of these potential projects. We'll call each one of these modifications projects that you're going to bring in. You'll assess the project and say, does this project have current value or future value? Meaning that if I build this in, people are going to build into it, and eventually it will generate more revenue, more value in the future. So as you're working through these plans, your KPIs that you'll be telling people and telling the business is saying that right now, the future or the current value of my company and doing revenue, here's all of the past indicators that show that today we've done $1 million in revenue. And our future revenue is going to be 3 million because we're going to 3x. And they can say, well, how's that? Well, we're going to increase customers. We're going to do all these things. But we've also built in these three pieces in our revenue stream that will start to generate this type of revenue going forward. So today they're only generating, say, 1% or 4% of the total revenue. But in the next 12 months, this space should be indicating that it will generate at least 30 to 40% of our upcoming revenues. So you're projecting forward based off of the little principles that you're building today. So I think that was really smart because that's also the processing side. It's saying, if I'm going to build this and I can build a value, I'm either putting the value today or I'm building the value for the future. And I got to make sure that the future carries some value, because if not, then all we're going to be doing is pushing the envelope and hoping that we can get more customers on board versus figuring out how do we get more dollars out of our existing customers through the platform that we've initialized.
Right, exactly. Like your CAC to LTV, right? Your customer acquisition cost to lifetime value, that driver, right? That is a KPI, right? Like how much is it costing me to get a customer, and how much do I make on that customer during the time frame that they're my customer, right? So you can look at that, and at first you're going to see your CAC cost go up, and then you should start to see your CAC cost go down and your lifetime value go up, as you get economies of scale, right? Well, if you spread that over time and you have actual plan and difference, you can actually see this happening with your business. And then when you start looking at probability, what's the probability that I'm going to be able to 3x? And predictability, which is when do I think I'm going to be able to get 3x? You have history, right? You have some previous history to look on to see, well, I was off by 40%. I made an adjustment. Now I'm off by 20%. I made an adjustment. Now I'm off by 10%, right? And pretty soon you'll find you're in the 5 to 10%. When you start to show investors that as an example, they're going to look at those numbers and they're going to be like, man, these people are on point. And it'll help you with your own business. You're not going to hire before you need to. You're going to be much smarter about the way you spend money, because there's always the two sides, right? Everybody always talks about making money, but it's really important that you focus also on how the money is leaving. It's cash in, cash out, right? So you constantly have to look at not just how much money am I making, but how am I dispersing this money into areas that are going to create more revenue. You know what I mean? I love it. It's like, you can tell by my tone, it's just super fun. It's like a chess game, you know?
It really is. And you know what? And I'll add in this other piece when I work inside of a startup and helping them re-engineer and revalue their business. I tell everybody to create a spreadsheet, put all of your people on the spreadsheet, and put them in two columns: people that are making me money and people that are losing me money. And I bet you any money, when you do this, 90% of the company will be losing money in your mind, because 90% of people are a cost and 10% of people are generating revenue. Now your goal is to figure out, how do I get that 90% down to 50%, down to 40%? How do I get more people in my business generating and paying for themselves inside my business? And as you start to move people over, you start to think of different revenue streams. You start to think of different ways that those people are supporting the initial revenue stream. Because at the end of the day, your goal is to continue to increase 3x, 4x your business while reducing the process, reducing the things that are costing you money, and spending more time focusing on how you're generating value for your customers and for your business. And over time, you'll start to see that 50-50 split. And all of a sudden, you start to see that you're generating more value, more profit, and more of that painkiller value in your own business as you move forward.
100%. And a lot of people don't realize that any business, regardless of what it is, runs like a waterfall, right? The customer journey is a waterfall, right? At the top of the waterfall is a pool, and that's your audience of prospects. And then it moves down into marketing and down into sales and down into service, right? So there's this journey of a customer that goes from pool to pool in this waterfall. And each one of those ponds that feed the waterfall need to retain themselves. So if somebody that's working at your company isn't in that waterfall, then they belong in one of those columns. I think you know what I'm talking about. So, like it gives people the ability to say, I am part of the revenue process, right? Indirectly or directly, I'm part of the revenue process. And more than the revenue process, I am part of the valuation of the business, shareholder value, right? Growth, margin, and retention, right? Because on one side, there's getting revenue and then there's keeping revenue. And on the other side, there's making sure that you don't have too much revenue consolidation in a certain customer, right? So I'm in the process of buying a company right now. They had 40% of their revenue on one customer and the customer left. Boom, 40% of their revenue just disappeared, right? I mean, it's really risky. A lot of people, they go whale hunting. They go after these big customers. They're like, yeah, just get this big customer and then I'm okay, until they leave. And now you're not okay anymore, right? So you also have to balance, as you're looking at revenue and as you're looking at valuation drivers, you have to look at revenue consolidation and customer consolidation, right? So revenue and customer are not the same, right? You have a big customer and you look at your revenue retention and you're like, yeah, I have 90% revenue retention, but you have 40% of that revenue in a single customer, right? So then you have to say, okay, how do I balance my book of revenue? And on the other side, you have to be focused on, the customers, right? The number of customers and the revenue are not the same thing. You have to look at those two things separately. But once you put all this stuff together and you got your KPIs watching these things, because those are just KPIs, right? And to your point, you understand the value of revenue and the value of expenses, to your point, having a column of like, this is making me money and this is costing me money. You have the data you need to drive your business. And this isn't like crazy analytics, right? This is like, you could do this in a spreadsheet, in an hour. It's not that crazy, right? It's harder to keep up with, but it's worth it. Otherwise, you're running blind. Literally, what I tell people is not doing this is like standing in a dark room with a flashlight and all you see is what you shine the light on, right? So you're wandering around bumping into things and everything, and you're just like, oh, there's something, right? And so it's a disaster. It's just a total disaster.
It's very reactive, right? You're not planning ahead. You're not seeing anything in front of you. You're not seeing the headwinds. All you're focused on is where the flashlight, to your point, is going. So you don't hit it, but you forgot that you just banged into that wall and you did all these other things along the way when you could have figured out a better way to process that.
Just turn on the
Open the room
lights.
up. Yeah,
Turn on
exactly.
the lights. Yeah,
exactly. And it's interesting kind of how while you're describing that, it goes back to some of, and again, it runs back to some of my thoughts around some of the chapters in the book. And one of them was, and they kind of in a way overlap each other, but it's the gray suit guy. When you were talking to him about a plan blueprint for the home, like, hey, build me a house, or here's the blueprint to how to build this house. So this also goes back to that whole structured idea that if you start to take more time, so I'll use the slow down to speed up. I think so many people in their business are always running so fast because they've got investors, advisors, all these people driving, pushing, and their team's pushing. They're pushing to nowhere. They don't have anywhere to go because they haven't fully been able to process out a strategy or a plan. And then secondarily, they don't have the blueprint for where they're trying to go. So the gray suit guy kind of really helps people think, I really do need this. I really do need a roadmap, at least to start, and then keep iterating on it. Is this something that you kind of push people to do, is create this blueprint and then make sure every year you're going back to that and planning the future year ahead of you? Like there is some sort of structure behind this, because what we're talking about is amazing. I love it because my head thinks the same way. I'm in a business, boom, boom, boom. Everything has to be done this way. But that's very limited and very little amount of people that are thinking that way, because everybody's always in the race going forward and they're not really planning. So how do you push these companies to slow down, to start planning, and take 5 years to build your company to greatness instead of trying to do it in a year?
I tell them that, fast is slow and slow is fast. And, if you, every 6 months, I'll redraw my plan. So I'll go to my strategy. So I think of it as your strategy, which is your overarching plan, and then your tactics, which is the, execution that you do on your strategy. So what I do is I have it. This is the first time I've actually talked about it. It's going to be in my next book. But so this is the breaking news, if you will. Um, I have this thing I call a modem. And one of the things that I did in research is I studied the Navy SEALs, I studied the first fighting wing of the Air Force, SWAT teams, lots of places to understand what happens when things go wrong. Everybody's got a plan, but what happens when things go wrong? And then how do they actually set things up? So what I did is I put together this thing called a modem. And the first thing is a mission, right? That came from the Navy SEALs. They have a mission. And the mission is simple. I want to do this so I can do that. That's it, right? Then underneath that mission, there are objectives, and there's an objective for each of the months that are in that quarter. So a mission is a quarter, and an objective is there's three objectives, one for each month in the quarter. And then underneath the objective are the weeks. So 4 weeks underneath objective. So what you have is you have your overarching vision in a document. Underneath that, you have your strategy, which is your plan per quarter, each month in the quarter. And then you have your tactics, right? Your tactical execution, which is what I'm going to do each one of those weeks. So I do that. Then the next column I do is delegation. So delegation, I use the RACI model. So roles. So if you're familiar with the RACI, you have responsible, you have accountable, you have consulted, and you have informed, right? So responsible does the work, accountable makes sure the work gets done, informed are the people you tell about it, and consulted are anybody that you have to consult with. So now you have your delegation piece. Then I do priority. And priority, I use the Eisenhower metrics. So this is what is urgent and what is important. Usually things that are urgent are there because you didn't do the important. So that helps you, and then impact and effort. And that combination helps you prioritize things. So now what you have is you have your big vision, you have your quarterly objectives, you have your weekly objectives, you have who is supposed to do what, and you have what the priority is of it. And that is how I put together my plans. And I go over that. So what you're doing is you're going over it every quarter, because when somebody, usually people will put together annual plans in a startup. Startups move at the speed of the internet, right? So you have to be prepared to make changes really quickly, and that process keeps you agile but on point, right? You're not like floating around all over the place with shiny thing syndrome. You're still on point and you're still organized, but you're also, you can flex real easily and jive to what's happening in the business.
I like that. And because you've added in the agile part to that structure, it's that, and again, this is how I perceive this, is that when you have plans, you can either be rigid that if the plan changes, you snap, or you adjust. And in this case, the more planning you have, the more adjusting you can do. The least amount of planning you have, the least adjusting you can do because you don't know what you're adjusting to. You don't know how to modify or
Exactly.
adjust. So
Yeah,
you can't get anywhere. You're kind of lost, right? So, it reminds me, and I'm going to keep pulling this back to the book, your El Capitan approach is that you had to pre-plan so much beforehand because you didn't know what the outcomes would be. It's not like you climbed the mountain already and you were on 3,000 foot of rock face and you're like, okay, if this happens, I'll just do this. You haven't done that before, so you can't exactly just adjust on the whim when you're hanging from a cliff. So you kind of plan as much as you can in advance, but then you have to be reactionary. But the thing is that because you tested, you tried, you did other things that were smaller, you enable yourself that when you are in the heat of the moment, you can shift because you had the planning. So your brain can go through the 25 steps that you already built, but it also can do it in nanoseconds to adjust quickly so that you don't fall or you don't lose your footing, whatever that might be. So you become more prepared because of the pre-work you did before you got there.
right. Like when you climb El Capitan, I did what's called the nose, which is a certain route. And there are certain, they call them lines or routes that you take, right? So your North Star, your business, your line is still the same line. Your route is still the same route. But how you go, and that's the overall mission, right? And then the strategy is each pitch, right? A pitch is basically a length of rope, which is roughly 165 feet. So each pitch you change the rope, right? Your climber and you're pivoting as you go up, and that is the strategy specifically focused on how you're climbing up, and then tactics are what you're doing when you're taking move from move to move. So it's the way I think about it is, the Navy SEALs, they have a mission, an overarching mission. It's not overly complicated. It's like, we're going to go here, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to accomplish this. So it's not overly complicated, but that's their mission, right? And then they have their strategy. How are they going to accomplish this mission? And then they have their execution, which is move by move. But then they have secondary plans in case something goes wrong, right? So they do things like they have what's called firing lines, right? So in business, we call them swim lanes, where people don't run into each other. That's why the Modem has delegation. So you don't ever have two people going, well, I thought you were going to do it. I thought you were going to do it. Or, the first alarm I see is when I look at businesses and you're in their conference room and people are just getting up and they're on their phone and they're handling fires all the time, right? And I'm like, okay, this thing is not run properly. So, there's different components of things I've learned from researching, like the fire departments. I'll tell you, this is a really cool story. So the smoke jumpers that deal with the wildfires, like, this is a very dangerous job. And, fire has its own mind. And so I asked them, I'm like, how do you put out fires? And they go, we don't put out fires. We contain them. And I mean, you think about that in business, right? So if they have one fire line and the fire is a square, it's 25% contained. Two is 50% contained. So what people do most of the time in businesses is something comes up and it's alarming to them, and they try to put out the fire. But while they're putting out that fire, there's 5 more being lit behind them because they didn't deal with the root issue. They just put a Band-Aid over it, right? So what the fire departments taught me is, hey, instead of that, why don't we focus on containing the problem and then put out the fire, or the fire will put itself out, right? So this was another thing I learned researching these guys, which I just thought was so fascinating, and I apply all this stuff to business. I sit there, if something's happening, I'm like, okay, take it to your point, right? Take a breath, think about the situation. Don't react. Just take a breath, think about the situation, and then think, how do I prevent this from happening again first? And then deal with the problem. Because otherwise you could be sitting there putting one thing out, another thing lights up, and another one lights up, and you're just chasing it's like whack-a-mole. You're just chasing your tail.
It really is. And, to kind of add on to that, I think there's, there's also the innovation. There's other ways that you learn through this process. And as you read more, you attend more things, you listen to podcasts, whatever that might be, those little tidbits of information that you recall and remember also help you react during that time period. So if you're on the face of El Capitan or you're in a fire, it's those things that you learn about. And one of them that kind of relates to the fire concept is that there was really fascinating, and I talked about it in another podcast, where a gentleman, there was maybe 16 firefighters out, and this is not a tragic story, not a great one, but you can take a lot of learning from it. And I think, to your point, is there's learning in everything that we listen to and everything that we gain, and it's how you use that learning in the future. And in this structure, the fire was coming on them in a rapid speed, and they either could run for their lives or they could perish. And the one individual turned to them and said, why don't we dig down here and light ourselves on fire when the fire comes, and this will help us? And everybody was like, what are you talking about? And he said, look, it will come through us faster and we'll survive. And nobody would believe him. So everybody said, no, we're leaving. They took off running. Unfortunately, I think there was only 3 that actually made it back too badly, and 1 made it because they were able to run. Most of them perished because they couldn't drop their tools. The problem is that their tools became a part of their identity, and they forgot that they needed to change a tool isn't your identity. You have to stop carrying these things around that create this identity for you, because the identity can sometimes be the negative to you. In this case, they couldn't drop their tools, they were weighted down, they couldn't run fast, and they ended up not making it through the fire. The individual that doused himself in fire, the fire swept through, he got up and walked away, harmless, never even touched them, because it was a different way of looking at how to tackle a problem. And if he didn't challenge status quo and everybody else would have followed him and challenged status quo, they all would have survived. And the individual that ran there, he dropped his tools. He didn't allow the tools to be his identity. So there's a lot of things you can pick up
That's
just
a
in a
powerful
storytelling.
story. Really
It is.
powerful story.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's incredible. Yeah. So it makes you think, I'm in a problem. I need to stop, breathe, think about something, and then say, how can I challenge this differently today? Or how can I challenge my team to think differently? Because really it's a team that's going to help you solve these problems going forward. So it is, in my case, when I challenge a startup, it's, hey, I can be mean, I can be this, but really I'm just going to challenge you. Do you really think that's how you want to go to market? Is that really why you think this? And I'll give them information that will make them think twice. Wait a second, that's a good point. And it's not because I'm right or this is my direction. It's because I'm challenging your way of thinking. Is this really the only way you can look and approach this problem? And once you start to see that there are so many avenues that you can pick, which is the one that's going to benefit you as a business or as a direction, I think it changes the strategy of how you go at life or at anything. So it's kind of fascinating, but I think in the way you're looking at it, say El Capitan, or even I want to dive into this just before we switch segments. It's even when you were driving the NASCAR and you talked about how when you jumped in and you just started that engine, it was roaring and you were like, right through my spine, my God, this is going to be intense. And then you just took off and generated that 50 laps. And the question I kind of had is that as you're going through these processes and you're building your company and you're being meticulous, you're slowing down before you speed up, and this is all super valuable. But to your point, when you sold your company, you couldn't believe this occurred. You went through these learnings, and then you get into this car, and the thing that you noticed from it was the adrenaline, the drive that kept you in that driver's seat that said, I'm going to do 50 laps, not one. I'm going to keep going. How do you take all of this process? Because if you do slow things down to speed up, how do you keep the adrenaline going as a founder or as a business that makes me want to get in that driver's seat every day so I can feel that roar and keep going? What is it that drives you? Because you're going to get investors and team and everybody that are always all over you that maybe make you feel you shouldn't be there. But when you're in that driver's seat and it's roaring, you don't even notice. You probably didn't even know. There could have been someone sitting beside you telling you to slow down, and you were like, "Who's that person? What are they doing here?" And you're just taking
There
off.
was somebody
So,
sitting telling me to
oh,
slow
that's
down.
even better. Oh, that's awesome. Way better then. But you get the point is that you didn't even really care or notice because you were in the driver's seat, you were focused, and you were going. How do you get founders to really believe in themselves that way and take the 30% of value that they're gaining from it, but just keep the adrenaline going and keep driven forward? How do you get that focus into the person?
I think that, well, let me back up to move forward. I think there's two types of founders, right? There's visionaries and subject matter experts. And visionaries see the world from the outside in, and subject matter experts see it from the inside out. So you get a subject matter expert who's an engineer and he needs a visionary co-founder to help him out, right? So I think about it that way. Then the other thing I think of is that you need a handful of things in order to be successful as a founder. And I mean 5 things, like a handful, right? Focus, drive, enthusiasm, discipline, and optimism. And you need to be able to manage these things, like use them, almost weaponize them, right, to your advantage. And then I think that for me anyway, the drive one, which is the one that you're talking about the most, is they go hand in hand. Let me just kind of go through this. So focus is your ability to focus on something and not get distracted, right? Extremely important as a founder. You can't be distracted because something else looks more exciting or whatever. You have to be focused. So focus. Drive means that you are driving towards something that you believe can happen, right? So I'm driving towards this end. I want to make this end happen. Now, as an autistic person, I have to complete things or it makes me crazy, right? It drives my wife crazy. I can't stop something unless I get it done. I have to complete it. So Drive is the ability to see the end and be driving towards that, almost as if, not as if it's pushing you, but as if it's pulling you towards it, right? So focus, drive. Enthusiasm is excitement, and it's contagious. And so how are you going to have drive if you don't have enthusiasm? And how are you going to have drive if you don't have focus, right? So that's focus, drive, enthusiasm. Discipline is the one thing that you use when everything else fails. This is the thing that, you're sitting there in bed, you want to sleep in, but you have a call at 4:30 in the morning, and you decide to yourself, I'm going to get up. That is discipline, right? It's not associated to the other ones. It's like a backstop, right? It's like the thing you pull out when everything else fails. Your drive, your enthusiasm, everything fails, and you're like, I'm just going to do this thing, the thing that you do that you hate doing, right? So, and optimism is the last one, and optimism is the biology of hope. Now, how are you going to have drive if you don't have the optimism that things are going to work out okay, right? If you don't have the optimism that things are going to work out okay, you're not going to be driven because you're going to be slowing yourself down. So, when I think about moving forward and the adrenaline that moves me forward, I think about that handful of things, right? And that handful of things working together as a unit, like a team, like an emotional, mental team that's in my own head that I manage and tame. Adrenaline is what you feel when everything is going great, right? Like I think of emotions as an autistic person. I think of happiness as just a mood, right? And when people go, "Are you happy?" and I'm like, "Right now," you know what I mean? Like, how do you, you know, it's a mood, right? Just like anger is a mood and frustration's a mood and so on and so forth. These are moods. The same thing happens when you're building a business. So sometimes you're pulling out the discipline hat. Sometimes you're pulling out the focus hat or the enthusiastic hat. You're trying to get your team motivated. You get enthusiastic, right? You're trying to get your team to focus on something. You pull out the focus hat. People have a couple of bad things happen, and you pull out the optimism hat, right? And you say, hey, listen, like I said earlier, you say, hey, failure is just another word for progress, right? I mean, so I teach people things like, you know, how do you think evolution even happens? It happens because of failure. That is evolution, right? So we're evolving as a company, and then that gets people all excited, and that's the enthusiasm, right? So I don't think there is one thing that creates or controls the adrenaline. I think it's 5 things.
That's awesome. And I would add to one other point that you put in your book, and this kind of summarizes all of these points. If you have your what, then all of these factors will help align because you know what you're building, you know where you're going, you have a vision, you have the process, and you're building all of these things, but you at least know what you're doing. And I think that's pretty powerful. Being able to self feed your drive, because as a founder, you really have to figure out, like in your vision, you said every year since I think you said you were 18, you did something you would never do every year. So if you tie that back to your business, you should almost do that as a business. Your business should do something every year that it's never done before, that it has to challenge status quo, and then it has to be out in the forefront, and it has to keep driving. It has to be allowing everybody else to have that innovation and that spirit and focus, but at the same time, it's all driven by one person at the top. Whoever that founder is, or whoever that CEO is, that person, he, she has to figure out how to keep themselves motivated, and then the thousands or hundreds or tens or one person underneath them to have that same focus and drive going forward. And you have to be able to create that value. And that's got to be a job in itself and already tough. So I think as you start to grow your business, you need to find people that fill those gaps of those visions that fit into those buckets for motivation, for process, for financial acumen, whatever those things are. Those are the kind of skill sets that are going to help you be able to focus on the business and drive it and offset everything else, because at the end of the day, those things are all super important and they're going to make your business successful.
Yeah, I mean, I love this riff, by the way. This is a blast. And also, you're really smart. And this is one of the best interviews I've ever had. So I just want to give you mad credit for that. This is amazing. To your point, with regards to people and getting the right people, there's a couple things that I talk about. One of them is what I've learned. um, is that you can have a scenario where you hire an 8, and the 8 hires a 7, and the 7 hires a 6, and the 6 hires a 5, right? Um, or you can train your people to not be afraid to hire somebody better than them, right? A lot of people are afraid to hire somebody better than them. But if you train them and you say, your job is to hire somebody better than them, your job as a manager is not what you get done, it's what your team gets done. So be careful who you hire, right? So that's one of the things that I tell them. And then the other thing is understanding the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So if you sometimes, I remember at eBay, I was doing these interviews and I was talking to people at the very beginning. I just started, right? And I had all these people and I had to do, and they hated me, uh, because I was like the new person in there and they were like, who's this guy now? Um, and I would ask them personal questions like, what do you do for fun? And they'd be like, oh, I play soccer, or I coach my kids' team, or, I do whatever. What I realized is that the same person that had no motivation had motivation. I just wasn't tapping into it. Right. So they, they were motivated to do all these things that were hard for them, but they weren't motivated at work. So I started realizing that the difference was intrinsic motivation, the motivation you get when you're playing Monopoly or you're playing a game, right? Or you're working with your family. It's intrinsic, it's internal. Extrinsic is outside. That's usually money, right? Or pride or this sort of stuff. And what I learned is that if you start using extrinsic motivations, specifically money, people don't know what they do is they end up putting themselves out of a job because they keep asking for money and asking for money and asking for money. It's insatiable, right? You can never solve this problem because they'll just adjust their lifestyle. And pretty soon they're making more than they should be making. And then you have to top grade them. You have to let them go. And essentially, they did it to themselves, not knowing. And you went along with it because you're fearful that you're going to lose them. And the whole time, all you did is you went after the wrong type of motivation. You didn't go after the intrinsic motivation. You couldn't figure out how to get them to be excited about what they're doing and be motivated on that and not motivated based off of money. And I called it up and out. I wrote an article for Forbes about it. It's like, you move people up and then you end up moving them out, you know, and you and that person did it to themselves, all because you focused on the wrong type of motivation.
I love that, and it goes back a bit to the story you tell about Bob in the book, where you know I think the process is that Bob decides to leave, and then the company feels screwed because they didn't understand how and what Bob did, but Bob brought a lot of value to the company, and you had to refocus on how do I correct that. And when I read that, it was like our Trump conversation. I was thinking, you build some process into this to support this person and their motivations and their drivers, and I think that that's brilliant the way you divided it, for sure, because it says this person doesn't need money. They just wanted to be part of a team, or they just wanted to be part of this process, or they wanted to be part of innovation. You needed to find out what made them tick. And once you found that out, you got more out of them because they felt part of that process or that structure that really generated a huge amount of value for you and the business, and probably tied them in longer so you didn't have to spend all the money that you thought you would have had to keep this type of talent, because they weren't looking for money. They were paid well already. They were caring more about all of the learning factors that are maybe tied into that. And in the case of Bob leaving, I always think those are great things because it's a challenge now. What did Bob do that was great? Let's find that. And what did Bob really not do that was great, that was screwing the company up? And can we modify that and become better as a business and replace Bob with, nobody? AI, or can we replace Bob with 6 people because Bob was so efficient that we can now divide that into other sectors that generate more value for the business? So I think there's always this reoccurring fear of everything that comes out of how you motivate people, but there's also a good place where you can start over in that section and come up with something more innovative or more functional for your business and how you're going to grow.
Yeah. I mean, extrinsic motivations like coffee, right? You drink a big coffee, you start to crash. You need another coffee. You crash, you need another coffee and another coffee. And pretty soon you're sick. you know, I mean, that's how extrinsic motivation is. And to your point, when I first started doing evaluations after the transaction, I put everybody on KPI structures, and it showed who was hiding, not doing anything, and who was doing things. And I actually laid off hundreds of people. Um, they were all people that were not adding any value, right? So immediately, bottom line revenue started to grow. And the crazy thing is efficiency went up, not down. Not only were those people not doing anything, but they were dragging everybody else with them, right? So it was like the real hard workers were pulling a train full of people that weren't doing anything. And those people will leave, and your bad people will stay, and you'll end up with a company full of, people that you don't want.
Time wasters. Agreed. I love it. Okay, well, Gregory, I swear to God, we could do about 6 hours talking about all this stuff. It's absolutely awesome. We're going to move to one segment, and then we're going to drop it, and we're going to book another call in 8 months and follow up on your next book. But I do want to jump into this one section because, and as much as I want to keep talking, this stuff is so valuable and it's really amazing. I could dive into some other facets, which were, you know, are we doing too much on this friends and family side? Are we focused too much our businesses around trying to create this unity instead of making it about business? Are we overcomplicating our businesses when they could be a lot simpler? I think there's so many things that I think we're overdoing, we're overstretching, we're running too fast. We need to slow down a little bit. And I know you talk about a lot of this stuff in your book, so I'm pretty excited for your next version and your next book when you're talking about Navy SEALs and all this great stuff. So I'm excited for that. But we're going to switch into this one segment, which is called the 60-second rant. So for 60 seconds, I'm going to set the timer up. Rant about anything you like. I'm going to try and contradict. Never works because I'm usually all supportive of these rants. So I'm going to go from that angle. But when you're ready, jump in, and you're off to the races on this one.
So I think that my rant is when I did the research, I found that the biggest mistake that founders made was bad decisions. And that left just another question: why were they making these bad choices? And that was based off bad advice. So then I was like, well, who's giving them the bad advice? The number one culprit in the bad advice was actually investors. And that's not because they don't want them to be successful. They do. It's because they see the world through the lens of an investor, and most of them haven't been practitioners. So they don't know enough information before they give advice. And to me, this is something that you need to be real. If you're an investor, you have to understand the way the founder sees you. You're on top of a podium, right? And they listen to what you say. So you have to be very careful what you say, because they'll do it to their own demise in a lot of cases. So I tell investors, I'm like, if you're not a practitioner, you need to do a lot more listening, and you need to understand that they know things you don't know, regardless of how long you've been an investor.
I love it. I want to be counterintuitive, and we were just over the 60 seconds, which I love. So perfect. No, it's brilliant. No one ever makes 60 seconds. There's too much to say. But though I can't even counter it, but what I can say is that the hardest part of building a startup is understanding that there's a million moving parts in your business and that you're going to need advice. You're going to need to have people to speak with. And the problem is that everybody that you speak with has their opinion, regardless if they've done it or they haven't done it. They have an opinion. And your job as a founder is to ask this question to multiple people with multiple disciplines so that you can take that information, noodle it around, write it down, and come up with a direction, because your job is to set the direction of the business. If you pick the wrong choice, that's your fault. Own it. I think there's a lot of issues with owning the direction or not making the call. And I think that advice is great. Take it from everybody, but make the call. I think we have a fear of being judged because we make the wrong choice. You need to make a choice. Get over the line, make the call, do it. And if it doesn't work, live, learn, move on from it, but make the call. I think we're so afraid. Oh, Bob told me to do this. Oh, Bob said this. Great. Bob's an amazing guy. But at the end of the day, it's your job as the founder to make a direction, set it, take as much information as you can, regardless if it's right or wrong, and then make a decision yourself and back it, and have everybody else will either support you or they'll go against you.
I love that. I mean, one of the things when I was doing politics that drove me absolutely crazy is when a politician changes their mind and the other side goes after them. Wish washy. They don't know what they want. And I'm like, they should be changing their mind based on information. Like, that's insane to say, oh, I've got new information. I have a different opinion on that, and then slam that person. It should be the other way around. The other person should be saying, look, you're the one that's not flexing to the information, that the new information you got, you're standing by. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? So to founders, yes, move with information.
Agreed. Yeah, accept it and use that as a benefit. And if you use multiple disciplines, I think to your point, when you're getting advice or you're getting insight or mentorship and all of those things, it's not just one-sided. This person has built companies great, but they didn't build your company. They didn't build your friendships and all those other great things. So you have to be able to take that information and understand it properly to give an outcome that will benefit your business as you move forward. But then stand behind it. And if you have to pivot, yeah, pivot. More information you gain, the best, which means you shouldn't be going out to the public and telling everybody your opinion until you're 100% certain you got enough insight before you go and make it broadcasted everywhere else.
100%. I couldn't agree more. You're incredible. Your founders they work with you, they're very lucky, because I've done, I don't know, a few hundred podcasts. I don't think I've had an interview that's this insightful and focused and very logical. It's incredible. I mean, yeah, man, I'm impressed.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know what to say, but thank you. And it's because I'm talking with someone that is not only uh, amazing at what they've done, but you've written it all in your book, man. It's all right here. Read the book; you'll get what you need. It's all derived and it's processed and oriented, and man, it worked. It worked very well. I enjoy getting the opportunity to speak with people that have been through the trenches, understand what war you need to fight and what wars you don't need to, and being able to describe that so that you can use this as a template as you go forward. So, Gregory, as much as I want to ask you a million more questions, our time has gone so far over, and I appreciate and respect all of the time that you've provided. So I think the best way we'll do this is we're going to have to jump into another podcast, certainly in the future when the time arises. But maybe the best way to end our show is that I want to give you the last word. Anything that you want to share to founders or to investors, I turn it over to you, and please share how people can get a hold of you as well.
Yeah, I mean, my personal website is gregoryshepard.com. I have up there all of my investments, all of my startups, everything I've done, because a lot of people don't believe that I've done everything I've done. So I put it all there to prove it. So there's that, and you can keep up with all the things I do in there through the newsletter. My business is startupscience.io. The book is The Startup Lifecycle. It's available on Audible, and also so you can read it or listen to it. And I am really grateful that you allowed me to be on your show for the second time. Truly had an amazing time, and I can't wait to do it again.
Likewise. Nope, very excited, man. Thank you very much for everything and all your time.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for now. Next up, we're talking with the awesome Colin Webster. You won't want to miss it.
I moved to England when I was 16, 17, finished high school in England on my own. I wanted to go to Oxford, so that was the way in. You couldn't go from a high school in Canada to Oxford. You had to go from as an English student, or you had to do a degree or something like that.